Intelligence community officials have now confirmed to CBS News that President-elect Trump has declined to take part in many of the daily intelligence briefings that have been offered to him. National security experts from both parties have expressed concern about this, including former CIA Director Leon Panetta on Face the Nation.
The whole purpose of providing the so-called presidential daily brief, it's to inform the president of what's taking place in the world. What do we know about the world? What do we know about crises? What do we know about those that are trying to in some way threaten this country? Frankly, one of the concerns I have right now is that this president is not getting his intelligence briefings. He's taken a few of them, but he's not getting them every day. If you're president of the United States, you better be in touch on a daily basis with your intelligence briefers, so that you have an understanding as to what's happening in the world, what are the crises you have to pay attention to, and what steps do you have to take in order to deal with those crises.
Those comments are from this past Sunday. Joining us now from Washington is Michael Hanlon. He's a senior fellow in foreign policy at the Brookings Institute. Thanks for being with us, Michael. This is, I think, for a lot of people, pretty remarkable. The president-elect comes into office with almost no experience in foreign policy. How could his decision to forego these briefings impact the way he interacts with the world? I mean, have we already seen a bit of that with that tweet about the phone call to the Taiwanese president?
Well, you know, I'm concerned about a number of aspects of Mr. Trump's looming presidency, but I'm not going to be too tough on him on this issue. He's not yet president. To pick up where Leon Panetta left off, presidents do need to know every day what's going on because they need to be ready to react. They're commanders-in-chief. Donald Trump is not yet the commander-in-chief. What I'd like to see, however, is some sense of a deep dive on the issues. So rather than hear 3 minutes every day about Syria and what's happening in Aleppo and what's happening somewhere else and which bombs were dropped and which neighborhoods are under attack, how about a 2-hour discussion on the course of the Syrian civil war, how we got where we are? I think that might be a better use of a president-elect's time than forcing him or her to feel obliged to take these daily briefings, which are going to come soon enough in a presidency one way or another. So on that one, I'm a little bit more flexible than some of the critics, but I'm not sure Mr. Trump is doing those deep dives. And so that's where my concern probably arises.
Well, again, I sort of wonder if this isn't something that is ultimately going to be replicated over the course of his presidency. I mean, I understand what you're saying, that he's still the president-elect and perhaps he doesn't have to get to them. But I think to the understanding of most Americans, given the fact that you don't have any foreign policy experience, it would be one thing if Hillary Clinton had been elected president of the United States, having had that time as Secretary of State and other positions in government, she perhaps decided to forego some of these briefings. But you have somebody who tapped into something very powerful here in the United States that a lot of people in this country felt very strongly, but when it comes to the outside world, doesn't have a lot of experience. You would think you want to get up and bone up on that as quickly as you can.
Well, let me both agree and disagree with you. I agree that this could be a foreshadowing of how he'll act as president. As president, you need to spend a lot of time on foreign policy and pretty much on a daily basis. You don't necessarily have to take the briefing in oral form. Some presidents prefer to read it. You know, the length of time you spend with it can vary. I take your point that perhaps we're going to see a pattern that will continue past January 20th, and that would concern me. But I maintain my earlier point that a daily recitation of the news of the last 24 hours may not be the best use of a president-elect's time for the very reason you're getting at. He has bigger, longer-term perspectives that he has to gain on some of these problems. So he needs to spend the time on the issue, but I'm not so sure that daily briefing is the best single approach. Now, to the extent that daily briefers have the ability to just throw away, you know, the detailed news of the last day and get into a more detailed historical discussion, that would be great. If they offered that, then perhaps Mr. Trump should take that. But that's not what's implied by daily briefing. Daily briefing is, again, very tactical, and I'm not sure that's what Trump should be obliged to do right now.
Michael, President-elect Trump has been criticized for having so many generals in his cabinet. Why would that be a concern?
Well, you know, hypothetically, of course, you could imagine a situation where all these generals tended to understand military affairs and the application of direct military power better than they understood other tools of government, so they would collectively recommend militarized solutions. Or you could imagine a situation where they all sort of banded together with generals who were still in uniform, and they almost formed a cabal that was very hard to challenge by anybody else, and they could sort of, create policy on the sly or try to, bamboozle people into doing what they wished. But I don't see that concern being applicable here in either case. For one thing, I believe that General Mattis is a very independent thinker. General Kelly is a very independent thinker. I do believe General Flynn's going to have to be a little more careful in how he handles himself, and I'm not sure that this 2016 has been the most exemplary in that regard. But in terms of the notion of having these generals, if you have generals like Mattis who understand very well the limits on the use of military force, the importance of diplomacy, of economics in foreign policy, then I think you don't really have the kind of theoretical concern that might exist at a different day and age or in a different country or with different individuals.
Michael, I want to ask you a question about, again, the conversations that the president-elect has perhaps had with intelligence officials within our government and also with leaders abroad. Part of the appeal, I think, for a lot of Mr. Trump's supporters is the fact that he's a deal maker. That's what he says all the time, that I make deals, I look at these issues, and he goes with his gut. He's been doing that from the very moment that he announced that he was running for the presidency of the United States. And I think a lot of his supporters and a lot of people who like Donald Trump and respect him think that his gut has generally been right. He is now the president-elect of the United States. A lot of people didn't think he'd get there. My question is, can we expect that he continues to make decisions based on his gut feeling about certain things? And that may not necessarily be a bad thing. We've had presidents that have been wonky, like Bill Clinton or LBJ. We've had others that have said, just give me the top-down information, for example, President George W. Bush, and I'll make the decision. Is there a balance, or do we need one or the other?
That's a great question. And we're just sort of setting up the discussion of President Trump that we'll soon be able to see in the flesh as he handles this job. Let's go back to the General Mattis issue. When he hired General Mattis to be his Secretary of Defense designate, Mr. Trump said he liked Mattis's tough guy image, his Mad Dog nickname, the fact that he always talks about killing the enemy and how that's not a bad thing, sort of the Patton quality of Mattis. And if that's what Trump liked, and that's all that Trump liked, then even though he got to the right decision, in my opinion, he would have gotten to the right decision for the wrong reasons. But if he understood something he didn't really talk about as much, which is that Mattis is a really bright guy, extremely well-read, extremely conversant with diplomacy and economics, as well as the application of military force, then maybe there was a little bit greater savviness to Trump's decision-making than he let on or wanted to highlight in his speeches when he announced Mattis. So that's just one example of trying to get at your question with what little information we have so far. We really don't know how Trump's going to behave in some of these more complicated issues. And I hope that there is sort of a hidden thoughtfulness emerging, because I think on some of his decisions since November 8th, especially in the foreign policy area, he's made a couple of relatively promising choices. And so I'm hopeful that that reflects sort of a thoughtfulness that, while he doesn't always convey it in Twitter, and while I'm not a supporter at this moment of the president-elect, nonetheless, perhaps there already is a learning curve going on.
All right, Michael Hanlon in Washington. Michael, thank you very much.